Greetings, YouTube. The doctor is in. Dr. Urias Papers here, coming at you with another commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. And today I want to go way back in the history of Dungeons and Dragons and talk about a conundrum that happened when the Player's Handbook got published. We have an excerpt from the Player's Handbook here from 1978, June 1978, when it was published. And this was a big problem for all of the players and dungeon masters that were playing the game at the time. So stay tuned and don't go anywhere. All right, before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. And don't forget to share this video. All right, here we are right here. This is from the Player's Handbook, the first edition. And at that time, it wasn't called first edition. It was the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook. Gary Gygax was very much trying to make the case that Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons were two different, completely different, separate games, but he introduced this paradox, this conundrum into the player base. So I'm going to read this out starting from this paragraph and this paragraph. So monster attack damage, and this is the combat procedures section of the Player's Handbook. You can see over here it says combat procedures, and it says how to do a saving throw. It talks about armor class, and then that was basically the end of it. That's the last part of the column. Then we go up a little bit more about armor class. The first strike, he talked about initiative, surprise, weapon factors, which he doesn't really explain it all in here. And then we get down to this. Monster attack damage. Monsters with weapons will generally attack much as characters do. Those with natural weaponry, such as claws, talons, teeth, fangs, tusks, horns, etc., will use the matrix for monster attacks. There are exceptions to both cases. This does not appear in this book. This matrix, it usually is a table that lists out the creature's hit die in a column. And then the top row lists out all the various armor classes, and then there is a number, and you would look up the hit die, you would go over the column, and then you would look for the number that you needed to roll on the D20. Now, the next paragraph talks about character attack and saving throw matrices, that same table. Your DM has matrices for each class of character by level groups, showing the scores required to hit the various sorts of armor and armor classifications. Normal men, such as men-at-arms, are always considered at level 0. Monsters are classed by their hit dice. All creatures use the same saving throw matrices. The modifier is relative class, that is, fighter, thief, etc. Items save on a special matrix. And again, these matrices, those tables do not exist in this book. And they actually would not come out until May of 1979 in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Here's the Dungeon Master's Guide here, May 1979. And we do not see any of these tables until then. So the Player's Handbook, if we look over here, comes out in June of 1978. Here's the foreword written by Mike Carr, who's the TSR Games and Rules editor at the time. 1978, June, is when the Player's Handbook comes out, and we have no two-hit tables whatsoever at all for monsters, or for players or characters. We have no saving throw tables for them. So people that are playing the game at the time, they've got this new book and they have no idea what number they need to roll. So in the preface to the player's handbook, we get this this little excerpt written by Gary Gygax, and it explains the book that's already come out, which is the Monster Manual. Remember, the Monster Manual came out, and I've got that note here. The Monster Manual came out in September of 1977. And so the Monster Manual came out almost a year, about 9 months before the Player's Handbook. And then the Dungeon Master's Guide comes out almost a year, 11 months after the Player's Handbook. Now, he says here, the whole of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was a project which involved varying degrees of my thought, imagination, and actual working time over a period of more than a year and a half. Because of other demands, the project was perforce set aside for a day or a week or even longer, making it hard to get back to. So he's talking about writing the rules and having trouble getting through that. And we do know that during this time that he was writing this book, he was putting it down and he was writing G1, 2, and 3, the giant modules. So the Hill Giant, the Frost Giant, and the Fire Giant adventures. And then he was also writing D1, 2, and 3, which were the Drow or Drow modules. So that was Descent into the Depths of the Earth, the Shrine of the Kuatoa, and the Vault of the Drow. So those all came out the same summer that the Player's Handbook came out. Then he goes on. Knowing that this would be the case when I began, the Monster Manual was selected as the first of 3 volumes. So we know we got the Monster Manual already, and at this time in 1979, I had picked up my copy of the Player's Handbook, so I had that, and this tells me there's another book that's coming out. So the Monster Manual was selected as the first of 3 volumes. So we got a monster book, but we didn't get any way to play those monsters except for what was in the original Dungeons and Dragons set at the time. So the first of 3 volumes in the advanced game to work on, hundreds of different creatures lend themselves to segmental treatment. Only after that book was finished did I begin to put the sheaved reams of notes for the players and dungeon masters books in order, and that only as the bones, tables, charts, and matrices for rough typing and careful rechecking before a final manuscript was built around them. So he hasn't even gotten the Dungeon Master's Guide done at this point. I would imagine that it was like notes on a page, and he was probably starting to write it and put the rules in when the Player's Handbook came out. But we did not really have those tables. So what did players do in the meantime? All they had at that time was Dungeons and Dragons. Now there's another particular event that was going on at the same time that these were being written, and one of the major reasons that Gary Gygax went to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was because he was trying to write Dave Arneson out of the game so he didn't have to pay him royalties anymore. Because remember, at this time, Gary Gygax was paying Dave Arneson 10% off of every book that they published. So he was trying to make the case that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was a completely different game from the original Dungeons & Dragons, which was published in 1974, and that he and Dave Arneson had worked on and created together in 1973. That Advanced Dungeons & Dragons was a completely different game, and because it was a completely different game, that Dave Arneson was not entitled to any of the proceedings from this. And we know that because of this. Here is a file that was sent to the U.S. District Court in Illinois. U.S. District Court in Minnesota. And it was April 28th, 1979. So that is before this gets published. But it is after the Monster Manual was published, which was September of 1977. So we've got these documents, and I believe that this was this was filed with the District Court of Minnesota before April of 1979. So the publishing of that monster manual probably triggered this lawsuit. And here it is right here. Dave L. Arneson versus Gary Gygax, Tactical Studies Rules, that's TSR, a partnership consisting of Gary Gygax and Brian Bloom, and TSR Hobbies, Inc., a corporation, civil action number 479-109. So Dave Arneson, like within probably a year of the monster manual being published, within a year, he sued Gary Gygax because he didn't get any money off of this. He was not paid royalties off of this at all. There were no checks that were issued for this. So we get this lawsuit, and Gary is trying very hard to distinguish Advanced Dungeons and Dragons from Dungeons and Dragons. But again, we got the Monster Manual and we've got the Player's Handbook, but no one has a way to tell how to hit except for the small to hit tables that were in the original Dungeons and Dragons, like brown box. It's their white brown box that they had at the time. So that brings us to February of 1979. This is Dragon Magazine number 22. And I have a nice PDF copy of this. And there's an article inside here. So we've got the table of contents here. And on page 29, Dungeons and Dragons, what it is and where it's going. And so we get an article from Gary Gygax. Now this is after the Monster Manual and after the Player's Handbook, but before the Dungeon Master's Guide came out. Because remember, the Dungeon Master's Guide did not come out until May of 1979. So we've got the lawsuit, and now we've got, and this was probably right before or right after the lawsuit. I'm going to guess that these articles started appearing right after that lawsuit, where Gary is writing in Dragon Magazine to the fan base, but really, moreover, he's answering questions for the fans, but he is also addressing the court about how Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons are very different games. So let's hone in on this, and it's 2 pages long, and I mean, for the most part, he's talking about Dungeons and Dragons and what's the point and why are we making Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and kind of the basis for Dungeons and Dragons. It's the second page of the article where he says, well over 2 years ago, we recognized that there was a need for an introductory form of the game. In 1977, the colorfully boxed basic set was published. That was the home set with the red dragon on it that had the blue in the background. So, and that was full color. And it contained simplified, more clearly written rules. So this was for beginning players, dungeon geomorphs, which were just like generic maps at the time. But then fanatical game hobbyists often express the opinion that Dungeons and Dragons will continue as an ever-expanding, always improving game system. TSR and I see it a bit differently. Currently, D&D is moving in 2 directions. There is the original game system and the new advanced D&D system. And he's got a trademark on there. And he's trying to distinguish between the original and the advanced system. But again, remember, the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook are out, but there are no 2-hit tables. So no one knows how to do combat. There's no rules for combat at this time, except for what was in the original game. So that's the big crux of this. So people were having to go back to the original game to get any inkling, any idea of how to hit, because there were 2-hit tables in the original game. So then he keeps going. The new participants can move from the basic set into either form without undue difficulty, especially as playing aid offerings become more numerous, and that is in the process. And the Home's basic set also had matrix tables in it, but they only went up to like 3rd or 4th level. So it wasn't really something that that you could go very much farther with, because Remember, in the player's handbook, we had player stats that went all the way up to 20th level. So as of all the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons system is not written yet, remember the player's handbook hadn't come out yet, it is a bit early for prognostication, but I envision only minor expansions and some rules amending on a gradual addition to addition basis. When you have a fine product, it is time to let well enough alone. So does that mean that D&D will be at a dead end? And this is kind of the first edition wars that happened. And he's writing this letter to tell fans that if they want to continue with D&D, the original D&D that came out in 1974, they can, but he wants them to switch over to ADnD. Hardly modules and similar material will continue to be released as to make the DM's task easier and his or her campaign better. They never really released anything for D&D after the Monster Manual came out. Once the Monster Manual came out, it was all Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, all the adventures, everything, all Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Quite frankly, the appeal of D&D rests principally upon the broad shoulders of the hardworking dungeon masters. So that's the people out there. So he's trying to make this case that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons is a different game. So, well, as I make no claim to perfection, no such claim can be made for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons or D&D for that matter. This column will cover controversial rules and systems, problem and so-called problem areas of D&D/ADnD, and consider new materials as well. If the games are not to be continually changing and evolving, neither is it envisioned that they have reached such a state of perfection so as to become immutable. So at a glance at the introductory sections of all of the works comprising the D&D ADnD systems will show that many individuals contributed to designs. The list in the forthcoming Dungeon Master's Guide is still longer. All of these individuals and audience at large are cordially invited to submit their thoughts and opinions on pertinent matters. So there you go. That's Gary telling us. Now he continues a few months later in Dragon Magazine number 12, or I'm sorry, this is volume 3, number 12, number 26, in June of 1979. Again, remember, this was May 1979, and it really hadn't even come out yet. That was when the note was written. So Dragon Magazine 26 had a series of context, and he's got an article in here, and he's got a preview in here as well. So we're going to look at the preview in Dragon Magazine 22 first. So on page 33 of Dragon 22, we get a sneak peek at the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. It says, work on the third volume of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons series. The Dungeon Master Guide is now in progress. And remember, we've gotten the Monster Manual, we've gotten the Player's Handbook, we've gotten G1, 2, and 3, and we've gotten D1, 2, and 3, and a couple other modules from the S series that have come out since then, and there's no combat rules. None whatsoever at all. So as much as we deal with, and in fantasy, the real-world limitations of time and space place limitations on the speed of our endeavors, thus it now appears that the Dungeon Master's Guide will be released at Gen Con, August 16th, 1979. And another thing to keep in mind with all of these books is Gary's trying to write these books in such a way that they are all released at Gen Con, which is almost always sometime in August of the year. So the Monster Manual was written in September 1977. That did not come out for Gen Con. However, the Player's Handbook, which was written in June of 1978, did come out for Gen Con because it came out that summer along with G1, 2, and 3 and D1, 2, and 3. But the Dungeon Master's Guide also came out. So they're trying to get products out for the fans at the penultimate convention, which is Gen Con. So they're trying to get it out for Gen Con. And here's the preview. So he's got a preview of some magic items like the Pearl of Wisdom, the Amulet of the Plains, Hammer of Thunderbolts, which is what we all love. There's a advertisement here. And then In the next page, we've got more magic items, some protection scrolls. We've got the Ring of Elemental Resistance. And then we get creatures struck only by magical items. We've got some tables with some contents of some oils and acids. And finally, on the next page, he put some attack matrices in. So we finally get some attack matrices that got put in. And this is the first time people are seeing these attack matrices. And they're seeing them primarily. So you've got your table for armor classes. And primarily, you're seeing these attack tables by class. So here's Clerics and Druids. And they go all the way up to 19th level. These are the tables that showed up in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And these are the tables that showed up on the DM screens that year as well. So, and it goes all the way to armor class -10. Remember, the basic set and the original Dungeons & Dragons only went to armor class 2. So people were kind of like, what do we do about these armor classes that are mentioned in D1 through 3? Because there's some like -8 armor classes in D3 and D2 on the Dro. So there, what do we do with these? And here you go all the way to -10. Here's the number you've got to get, and all the levels. So these are Clerics and Druids, and then we got Fighters, Paladins, Rangers, Bards, and 0-level Halflings and Humans, all the way to 17th level and up. And then we've got Magic Users and Illusionists. So this is the first time we saw this. Now, here is the 2-hit tables for monsters. 20-sided die score to hit by level of attacker. So thieves, assassins, and monks. So that would be that one. And then monsters would use one of these tables. And then we've got the assassination table, attack matrix for monsters. Here it is right here. So we've got all the way up to 16 hit dice, down to armor class -10. We got another advertisement. And then we got the matrix for turning undead, which we didn't have. And finally, we've got psionics, a psionic thing, and so on and so forth. This was an important part of the game. Saving throw. We didn't even have saving throw matrices for characters. This is all in this preview. This is an integral part of the game that was missing literally since Gen Con of 1978. So for 9 months, players did not have this, and all of a sudden they had it if they bought Dragon Magazine number 22. So you have this now, and you can actually play the game according to the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rules. But before that, everybody was just kind of extrapolating and trying to figure out what was going on. So that is just a preview of things that were going on with Dungeons & Dragons at the time, and how decisions were made on what books were going to come out and what types of things influenced them, and how players were trying to figure out to hit rules, which have changed quite a bit. This is all descending armor class, and now, as you can see up here, it's all descending armor class, and we are no longer using that. We're using an ascending armor class now, where armor class 10 is no longer, that was the lowest, that was like the worst armor class that you could have. So that is the video that I have for everybody today. I hope everybody enjoyed, and I will catch everybody later.